State government and local government can be, depending on how your state and government are structured, but it is very difficult to fire somebody. So if and your pay is not tied to how hard you work. Okay, so let's think about that from a teacher perspective. I have been teaching, this is my 16th year of teaching. I make the exact same rate of pay as every other person in Frisco ISD that has been working for 16 years. Okay? Some people work harder than me. Some people work less hard than me. Some people are better teachers. Some people are worse teachers. My effort is not rewarded based on pay ever. And that's what a lot of people criticize about education. Okay, let's think about how this is different though. Okay? So for me, there is some kind of incentive, right? Because it makes me happy when you learn, right? And I enjoy my job. So there's some kind of other kind of payoff besides just financial. Working at the DMV, it is possible that there is very little incentive to work hard because, yeah, you might help somebody, but nobody's ever happy when they go to the DMV. A lot of bureaucratic agencies, you're not happy when you go to the post office. So the reality is there's not probably the same level of job satisfaction. So it doesn't matter if you move at the rate of a sloth or you work your tail off, you're going to work the same number of hours. You're going to get paid the exact same rate based on your years of service. And it's incredibly, incredibly difficult to fire them. Okay?
I think it's hard for them to be happy just because they deal with so many people.
Without question, yes.
They deal with people that are probably
the same thing
mean.
over and over again. You need a license.
Absolutely.
Okay, smile.
So what I've put up here on the screen for you, this is an example. You're never going to know all of the bureaucracy. It's huge, unless you went in and specialized in studying that. So today I'm just going to kind of skim the surface. But one of the things is the president makes the news, the Congress makes the news, the court makes the news. Bureaucracy doesn't make the news unless they do something wrong. Because then it's ooh, what did they do? They messed up. So this is an example. I don't know if you guys remember a couple years ago when there was that big BP spill, the oil spill down in the Gulf. So that was a problem. Well, it was the job of MMS, the Minerals and Management Service, to go in and clean that up. When the people don't like how bureaucracy responds, or they're not efficient, or they're not effective, that's when we start to kind of talk about them. You may remember with Hurricane Katrina, what government agency would have been responsible for coming in and helping with the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina? Good, it's FEMA. So FEMA, rarely do we talk about FEMA in a positive light, but you guys, FEMA helps a lot of people, right? But that's when they're carrying out their job. So again, because it doesn't make news. When oh wow, FEMA really helped a lot of people through a tornado. Good job. We talk about it in the negative. So here is a paradox for you. According to Pew Research, Americans tend to have a favorable impression of their most recent encounter with the federal bureaucracy. So there's an example. Or you get married, you change your last name. If you choose to do so, you have to go to Social Security agency and get a new Social Security card. Okay? But we have a very low opinion of bureaucracy as a whole. Let's talk about that a little bit. Why do we think that might be? Why might we like an individual who helped us with a government service, but we don't like the institution as a whole? Does that sound familiar to you? Congress. Isn't that exactly what we said about Congress? That we hate Congress, but we tend to really like our individual congressmen? So let's relate that then. Why might we like individual bureaucrats, except at the DMV? Why might we like individual bureaucrats, but we hate the bureaucracy?
Maybe because a certain person is has interest, or you spark interest in them, but as a whole, they don't do what they're actually saying they will.
Because you don't use all of them too.
Absolutely. And especially right now, you guys, there's such an anti-government feeling. And whenever we say bureaucracy, people are like, oh, bad, wrong, wasteful, inefficient. But if you go down to if you go to the post office today and the lady that's working at the counter is really nice to you and she helps you with your problem, you walk out and you're like, oh, what a nice person. Just like if that happened at Target. You know what I'm saying? They're performing a service. It's a customer service thing. There are very kind individuals who work for the bureaucracy who do a really good job. They're not political. It's not a policy thing. They're simply performing a service. Collectively, though, we think about the problems of bureaucracy, and some of them are very, very real. All right, so we want to talk about this idea then, because one of the popular things that politicians like to talk to us about is cutting the bureaucracy. You're going to hear that over the next couple months. We're going to shrink the bureaucracy. We're going to make the government more efficient. We're going to run it like a business. So there's kind of like two schools of thought, okay? One of them says this: every time you expand government policy, you have to create somebody who's going to enforce it, okay? What have I called that all year when I say that government starts getting involved in lots of different kinds of policies? Good. So as the scope of government broadens, don't you have to create agencies who are going to be charged with enforcing that? I mean, like, again, the president can't just hop in their car. However, the reality is there is a large amount of waste that exists within bureaucracy, just like it does everywhere. Chris Thompson and I were talking about it this morning, and he used to work in the steel industry, and he sold steel basically to like prisons and like different places that would have to purchase that. So he worked for a lot of government corporations, and he said the amount of inefficiency and waste is staggering because of the law. The amount of paper you have to sign, the amount of people you have to talk to, how compartmentalized everything is. Okay, so I'm going to show you a video clip from a man named Rubio. You might recognize him. He ran for president. He's a senator in Florida, and he's just kind of, this is a campaign video, but he's talking about his perspective on bureaucracy.
Hi, I'm Rubio. Throughout the last couple of weeks, we've been traveling the state talking about what government can do to create economic growth. Economic growth, of course, means more jobs. More jobs means more prosperity. More prosperity means more revenue for government at lower tax rates. But what will they use this new revenue for? We all know what they'll use it for. They'll use it to grow government and even our debt. They won't use it to pay down our debt or pay essential government services. And so it's so important to also have a plan, not just to create prosperity, but also a plan to require fiscal discipline on the federal government. Now, all week long, we've been talking about some specific ideas as part of our 12-point plan on what we can do to get our debt under control and government spending in check. Today's the fifth and final installment in that series. And this one is a dual one. The first thing we want to do is, in some ways, symbolic, but a very powerful symbolic message. And that is that government must live within its means as well. And so, I think we should cut by 10% the budget of both the White House and the Congress. Their budgets have grown over the last 2 years, while your budget, my personal budget, and the budgets of millions of Americans and their businesses have shrunk in an economic downturn. That hasn't been the case in Washington, D.C., where government has basically held itself harmless from this downturn in our economy. It would set a powerful example, and by the way, save a few $1 million if Congress were to cut its budget by 10% and the White House did as well. But here's a bigger idea, one that will really matter. We need to shrink the size of the federal workforce, and here's how you do it. For every 2 civilian federal employee that retires, that leaves, you only hire one person to replace them. That allows you, over time, through attrition, to lower the federal workforce without having to lay people off or fire people. People retire every year. Every time 2 of them retire, they should only be replaced by one person. And that will allow us to bring the federal workforce under control, something that is a major contributor to our annual deficit and to our debt. Well, I ask you to go on our website and learn about all of our ideas. We've rolled out policies.
So, like I said, kind of two different schools of thought. If you will take your paper, please, your graphic organizer, and flip it over and read along with me on question 1. Question 1 says, why do Americans tend to view bureaucracies in a negative light? To what extent is bureaucracy necessary? What kind of reforms do you think might be needed? Why don't you guys take about 5 minutes, you can work on this together or by yourself, but I want you to think about, in light of everything that we said, what is your perspective on bureaucracy?